Welcome to the third in our series of the Podcast Catalyst webinars. The Podcast Catalyst is all about showcasing Africa's podcast creators and connecting them with their new favorite tools, techniques, and shows. My name is Sean, and this week I'm very excited to talk all things podcast community building: the why, the how, the when, and maybe even the where. My guest is a former television producer and reporter at NBC, did a stint with Bloomberg Politics as a writer, and is now the community manager for my favorite online podcast and video studio, Riverside. Kendall Breitman, thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited about this.
So why don't you do me a bit of a favor here and a bit more background, color in the outlines that I just mentioned, if you could, and maybe specifically your current day to day as Riverside's community manager. Bring us up to speed.
Yeah, so as you said, Riverside's community manager, and for anyone that doesn't know, Riverside is an end-to-end recording solution, so you can record your remote podcasts or whatever you're recording in high quality audio and video. And so my whole part of my job is really bringing people together around their passion for creating, honestly. And just to take it back a little bit, so as you said, my background's actually in television and news production. So I worked at Bloomberg for the 2016 presidential election, and then later moved on to MSNBC. And while I was doing that, it's kind of funny looking back now because while I was doing that, my favorite part of the job really was speaking to people before or after events and understanding more about them, what drives them. Because especially when you're talking about marketing, I used to say, what's a bigger marketing campaign than a presidential election? You know, you get one vote every 4 years. Who are you going to use it for? Who are you, like, who's making you feel passionate? So I used to love taking these stories from people and hearing more about what they're passionate about, what they love to do, what drives them, and take that story and kind of put it together into something, into a news segment or into an article. And so then when I had later on heard about community management, it honestly wasn't even something that I had thought about. But when I was reading through it, I was like, wow, these are all of these principles that I actually love about journalism, getting to know people, getting to understand what can help them, what makes them feel connected to other people. And so kind of made the switch into community management. So it seems really different because it's, television production, community management. But at the end of the day, it took a lot of the things that I really loved about reporting and put it into community management. Yeah.
It is very interesting, as you say, that we don't necessarily see those connections. And because we've labeled certain jobs as television reporter, and in our mind's eye, we have an idea of what that looks like. But when you start to break it down and the skills that you have and the interactions that you've had, that does obviously translate into other spheres as well. So, yes, it might seem a bit odd for people to go from television producing to online community management. But even in my time as working with on radio and producing elements, it's all about the interactions, about making people feel
Exactly.
comfortable, and you get the best out of them. So I think it's a great fit. How long have you
Thank
been
you.
in? How long have you been in the position, and what does your day to day look like now? Then, as Riverside's community manager.
So I've been in the position for a little bit over 6 months, actually, and my day to day looks different every day. So basically, what I like to do is I like to bring in as many community interviews as I can throughout the day. So I love to schedule interviews with people that are in the Riverside community and just learn more about them, what they love to do, what their goals are, what they're hoping to learn more about. So those interviews really take me through my day. It's all the conversations are really fun. So it's nice to have this work and then have a little like discussion with somebody just about what they love and then go back to it. So I could be planning meetups. We could be working with our partners, community members who are beta testers. We can be I'm developing guides and other helpful tools for the community. Basically what I'm doing is I like to say that when anyone brings somebody into a product, there's marketing beforehand, you're trying to get them in. Once they're there, they have the product and support. But it's kind of like, what more can we be doing? Like,
Mm,
how can we be helping you become, for this instance, a better podcaster? How can we be helping you feel like, a lot of people that I've spoken to will say, I just started podcasting, and because I joined this community, I feel like a podcaster.
mm.
Like, I'm in this community now. So really just trying to develop different ways to make people feel a part of that community.
100%. And I
Yeah.
must say that the community that you are managing is thriving. It's
Thank
positive.
you.
It has a really good feel about it, and it feels very collaborative. So, hence me leaning on you, Kendall, to get some tips and tricks as to how to create that environment. I have met some really great people through the Riverside Facebook page, as an example. I'm now connected with people in different countries around the world that I'm hoping to meet one day, and all for this shared passion around podcasting. So, I guess the next point here then is how. How do we then, as individuals, maybe as hobbyist podcasters, maybe as podcasters that put together structures for our businesses and we are coming up with frameworks and seasons, we understand to some degree that it's important to have a community. So,
Mhm.
how then do we even start to build our podcast community? And that's essentially what we want to talk about today. Maybe if you could outline for me then what a community around a podcast would actually look like. And
Mhm.
even though we know it's important, why? Why do I want one?
Yeah, so I would say that the first thing with what a community would look like, I think that it really depends on your podcast, and I'll give you an example. So for Riverside, so as I said, I come from a world of journalism. And so
Mm,
for me, when I started this job, I was like, okay, people want community because they want to network, because that's kind of the world that I'm from. It's about networking, it's about who you know. And then I started doing these community interviews, like I just mentioned, and it completely changed my outlook on it. So I would say that first step is that if you can, like, talk to people that are listening to your show, because
mm,
it really changed my perspective of what people want. And what I found that people wanted in the podcasting community is, yes, they want to network, but they want to network with the purpose of getting better at their craft. So they want to network so that they can ask somebody questions, that they can get advice. And so these community interviews were key to figuring out what the value is. So that's the first kind of step, is figuring out what your value is. If you can't do community interviews, then just trying to figure out, okay, if I'm a listener, what added value? It's exactly what I was saying before, like with marketing and a product, you take somebody in. It's the same thing with podcasts and listenership. You're taking somebody in. What more can you be adding for
mm,
them? And I would say that a lot of people come to your podcast to, like, maybe for your guests, but also because they connect with you as the host. So I would say taking, like, community takes that relationship, takes that want to kind of bond with you as the host, and just brings it into another space to create those further bonds. So if you are able to do something that displays your personality more, and the reason why you, like, take a reason why listeners listen to you, and then just kind of supercharge that into your community. As
mm.
far as where, I would say that that also depends on just where the people that are listening to you live. Like, if you, I don't mean physically, I mean that, like, if you're doing a business podcast, maybe a LinkedIn group is best for you.
Sure.
If you are doing, or maybe it's a newsletter. Um, for podcasting and for Riverside, we were trying to meet people where they are on their day to day. Facebook groups, Facebook. We might be also expanding over into Discord, but basically, it's about trying to figure out where your people are and what value can serve them while they're there.
Mm,
And
mm.
the second question was in that, what can people be doing to bring them in? Is that what?
Well, we're getting there. Yeah, I think
Okay.
maybe that's a good next one, because getting people to listen to your podcast can be challenging at
Mhm.
times, right? So then how do we then get those same people to become community members? And I guess maybe slight differentiations. We're not necessarily asking for these people to be active, or maybe in time you are. Maybe in time you're building courses and materials around the podcast that you want to be able to sell on. It's a good idea to have start building a community as soon as possible, I suppose. But in that sense of making sure that people listen to the content, having some way to get them, yeah, engaged,
Mhm.
is always going to be a good idea. And as you say, if it's a case of just taking the elements of your personality and amplifying those a bit. But if it takes me a lot of work to get someone to listen to my podcast in the first place, are there tricks, tips, tools to getting someone to respond to a call to action and become part of a podcast community that you can kind of rely on them showing up week in and week out?
Yeah, so I would first say to make it as easy as possible for somebody to join your community. So I would suggest linking to your community in your show notes. People like trying to put as little friction as possible between yourself and with themselves and that community. Tricks that I like are one of my favorites is I've heard a few podcasters do this. They will tease a conversation that happened in their community. So they'll say, "Oh my gosh," they'll say their name, like Angela had the funniest comment about what happened last night in this show or something. Like trying to give people a bit of FOMO, saying,
Right.
okay, I'm make them feel like they're missing half of the conversation just by
Hmm.
not being in the community group.
I hear you.
So yeah, so what we like to do is for people that aren't in our community, we'll put a newsletter and we'll put a newsletter out to users, and I will kind of tease something that's happening in the community. We have a giveaway of a microphone happening today, or today we're all exchanging pictures of our setup and giving each other advice on how to step up their studio. So you're able to make somebody feel like they're missing out by not being part of the community. And I
Right.
would say that that's a big driver because people
Mm.
want to be part of that conversation. And they're already proving that they want to be part of that conversation by listening to yours.
Yeah. Very interesting. I forget which platform I'd seen this on now, but there was an interview being done with a creator. And because you brought this up, this is now all of a sudden top of mind for me. And there was this mention of how many creators, let's talk in a very catch-all phrase, would say things like, like, subscribe, and follow, right?
Mhm.
Um, but maybe if you change that phrasing to more along the lines of, you can get more ideas like this here. It's kind of it's pulling you in because that psychology, as opposed to telling you to, like, subscribe, and follow, which is just such, it's almost like a phrase that just washes over so many of us now. By using the psychology of, you can get more of that, these ideas here, not like to get more ideas, not subscribe for more ideas, just you can find more ideas. And that seemed like a nice invitation to become more involved in, like we were talking about, in that community. um Interesting little changes in phraseology that move
Exactly.
you to action.
Exactly. And this is also, I remember the second question. You were asking why community was important. And this is
Yes.
exactly why, like, because people want to feel connected to something. And if they feel more connected to you, then they feel more loyal to you, then they feel like in your podcast, they are more likely to buy products if you're trying to monetize.
Hmm.
They're more likely to tell their friends about it and spread the word. But also, so that's like part of why community is important. But I also think that to kind of flip it on its head, I think that community is also important for podcast hosts because, first of all, it helps them create a better show. They're able to kind of crowdsource, see what their community's talking about,
Hmm.
and then create a show, an episode around that to kind of meet those needs. But also, I think that podcasting sometimes can be a bit lonely
Yep.
and it's really hard work. And there's so much that goes on in the background but by the time that anyone's even listening to an episode. And so I think that it's nice, like everyone likes to kind of feel the sense of accomplishment, belonging, that they're creating something beyond just the podcast. So I think that also it's really great for motivation for hosts too, to know and have direct contact with people that are loving your content. It just like anyone can just be kind of lifted up by that. And then your listeners are also lifted up by each other. They find other people that are also interested in something that they're interested in and love
Mm,
something that they love.
mm. Do you think there is a best time to start building the community? If I'm starting a podcast today and I'm going to release my first episode in 2 days' time, do I start talking about my community and building it in the very first episode? Or should I give it a couple of episodes to figure out who my listeners are and then start introducing community? Is there a best time?
That's a really good question.
Thank you.
I was about to cut you off and say now. But I would say that I would say that nobody wants to join an empty room.
Yeah.
So if you're able to create that community early on, then I think that that will encourage other people to join. So I'd say as early as possible to start creating your community. And then when you're saying, or would should you wait until you kind of figure out who your listeners are? This can help you figure that out.
Mm,
So I would say to get a kind of a jump on it and try to start at least laying the foundations for community, even if it's a link in your show notes that says sign up for my newsletter or reach out to me on Instagram. I'd love to chat with you. And then from there, kind of taking them and saying, hey, I'd love to start a community. Where do you think, are you on Facebook? Are you on LinkedIn? Like, trying to figure that out and having these individual conversations early on can be helpful.
mm,
But
mm.
really, is like if you're not creating a group, I think that you should early on at least start to be community minded early on.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Okay. That is a good point, to at least be community minded, so that, yeah, there is something that you're creating bigger than yourself. And it's a lot of hard work, especially if you're doing it all on your own. It's nice to have a little group of cheerleaders potentially that are sitting in a Facebook group or are interacting on Instagram, that are looking forward to or engaging with the content that you're creating, to keep you motivated. It's very
exactly.
helpful. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I just did a podcast interview and I had two people reach out on Instagram after the interview, and it's a good feeling and it kind of keeps you going on what you're doing because
Yeah.
no one wants to feel like they're podcasting into a empty space, you know? It's nice, it's helpful, and it's motivating to get that feedback.
Yeah. Okay. So then, let's look at the platforms and the tools that we could consider. Now, there's obvious ones. We all know that Facebook exists. We've all seen what's happened with Twitter slash X slash, what is it going to be next week? Who knows what Elon decides? We're aware of Threads. We know of Instagram. And maybe there is something out there that suits us better that we haven't yet thought of. You've already
Mhm.
mentioned things like LinkedIn groups or newsletters. What platforms do you see being used quite a lot? And maybe you can run through some of the ones that you guys utilize and have had great success with.
Yeah, so our main community right now is on Facebook. And that was something when I had come in that was already set up, and so I just kind of like took that, hit the ground running with it. And so we've also found what I will do during these community interviews is I'll also ask them what platforms they are active on. And what I find is that where depending on the platform that you go to, you also get a different audience. So
Mm,
when I will reach out to people that have mentioned Riverside on LinkedIn, we have a much different conversation on our community call. It's maybe they're doing podcasts for like their podcast manager and they're managing multiple podcasts. So it kind of will depend. Our main community is on Facebook, but we are also, after speaking with a couple of community members, also thinking about opening up on Discord because that's also where because it's also a tech company.
yeah, yeah,
So where we want to kind of expand into getting people that are interested in technology and video and audio and kind of the intricacies of that. I would also say for some communities, Circle is one that I've heard good things about,
mm,
and they have a lot of great tools for bringing communities together. But that just kind of depends. The downside of Circle is just that, like Discord, you have to kind of go out of your way in order to seek out community in that way,
yes,
rather than
mhm,
kind of meeting people where they are.
mm,
So I would say that those are the main ones that we're using: Facebook, Discord, and then reaching out to people through LinkedIn, Instagram. That's another thing that we'll do to create community is
yeah,
I'll go through all of our social media and check out who's commenting, who's sharing our posts. And if I see somebody that's like, no matter if they've just tagged us one time, I'll
mm,
reach out and say, hey, thank you so much. I would love to know more about you. Let's set up a chat. And every time, I also find that when you reach out to those people, people are, first of all, excited about it.
Yeah.
They are excited to meet you in person and get to chat. But also after that, their engagement continues to grow because
Yeah.
now they feel that connection with you. So I've
Hmm.
noticed that. So I think that if like I wouldn't try to find some solution that nobody's thought about for community. The whole point, I feel, is to meet people at places where they're already hanging out.
Hmm. Hmm. 100%. And maybe then in time, as your community has developed, you might start to I don't even know if you would shift it to something that's owned, like something like Circle, as you quite rightly say, getting people to join a circle or a mighty, I forget their name now, but developing an entirely independent community, separate or devoid from where people are, is a lot harder to do,
Mhm.
and your value add needs to be quite strong to get people to make that jump.
Exactly. And so what you can do is do this meet people where they are, like a Facebook group or something like that, and then create other opportunities. So for example, we're doing a few meetups.
Mm,
And so when we're doing these meetups, we're also having them register for the event. So then we also have their email, and we can reach out to them for newsletters, if or we are able to pair them with other people that are local in the community, so they can have a kind of a local mentor. So it's kind of about like it's about steps. So I
mm,
would say that it's about kind of starting with meeting where they are. And then in this case, it's quite literal, saying like, would you like to meet me where we'll be? And kind of just seeing how people like, but if I started with saying, hey, we're Riverside, come to this meetup, that wouldn't be as successful. It's
sure.
instead saying, hey, here's all this value. If you want to meet all like these people in person, let's go meet at this bar at this time.
Mm. And I mean, we've all lived through the pandemic. We all know what it's like to feel isolated and do things on our own and be trapped, and to have more people around you that are, I like to use the word geeking out on the subject matter that you also are so passionate about, and to find those kindred spirits. And then to be able to go offline and actually meet them is a very cool thing that I'm seeing more and more of happen in the podcasting space. And some are even monetizing that, being able to develop these external events or in-person events as a side arm to their podcasts. Um, so yeah, very, very important then, as we've now highlighted, the the strength behind developing a community, and getting it going as soon as possible. I think
Yeah.
maybe a way, and you could tell me if this is even on track, a way to maybe gauge who your listeners are if they're not already your immediate friends and family that you can interview, so to speak, potentially running a Google form in your show notes to try and get some form of feedback. Um, Platforms like Spotify or Apple would allow for you to do reviews, but they aren't necessarily the same as being able to reach out to that person afterwards to say thanks so much for listening. How else would you be able to draw in someone that you've never met before to allow for me to pick up the phone or send them a message and engage with them? Um, yeah,
Yeah, so I would actually say that a mistake that that a lot of podcasters are doing is that they're only joining podcasting groups and communities. But what you should be doing is, unless you're covering podcasting as a like as your podcast, what you should be doing is joining the communities that your listeners are in. So, for
right.
example, if you have a health and wellness fitness podcast, don't join. I mean, come and join the podcast community, specifically Riverside's, but also come and like join communities where people are talking about health and fitness and wellness. And then you can
Yes.
do things instead of posting, here's the link to my episode, because no one wants that to get spammed. Instead say, what like I was speaking with a community member from Pod Central, and he was saying, instead ask something like, what's more important, a healthy breakfast or getting enough sleep? And excuse me. And so if somebody like it creates discussion, you see where people are passionate about, you can create two episodes of that.
Sure.
If it's a resounding no, it's sleep, then you create an episode about sleep. It's about kind of like meeting those communities where they are. And in that
Mm,
case, as people are commenting, you're able to comment back and say, "Hey, can I ask you more about this?" Or later on say, "Hey, I was really inspired by your comment. I actually have a podcast. Here's the link." And then start to create those relationships.
Smart. Okay, you're seeing connections that I hadn't seen before, and those are the tips and tricks. That's the reporter in you, Kendall. I think seeing the story, seeing how to
Yeah,
create the story, where
thank
there
you.
wasn't necessarily anything in the beginning. That's really cool. Those are great pieces of advice. I really appreciate that. That's very cool.
Thank you so much. Yeah, no, it's just about figuring out like if they don't have if they're not in your community, they're in other communities. So
Mm,
it's just about and those people that are in communities are also much more likely to join yours. It's like
mm.
how when you it's the idea of a podcast ad and a podcast. You're already meeting people that are listening to podcasts that are verified podcast listeners. So
Yep.
it makes sense. It's the same kind of thing. You're already meeting people who are in community groups about health and wellness in this example. So it's about just finding those people, hearing what they have to say, and then hopefully bring them over to your community at one point. But that's like a slow process of just
Yep.
making those connections, celebrating wins, being an active member of those communities rather than spamming.
Yes.
We actually had an Ask Me Anything with Kevin from Grow the Show, and
Hmm.
one of his things was promote, don't no, um, participate, don't promote.
Yes.
So
Oh,
that
yeah.
yeah, stick to that.
That's really good advice. As you're talking, I'm also kind of reframing this idea of these communities in my head, and almost thinking of in the past. I think if I were to start a community, it's like a little house that I'm building, but it's empty. And how do I get people inside that house? And now I've got this neighborhood of houses standing next to one another. There's a Facebook house and an Instagram house and a newsletter house, and how do we get people to move from one to the other so it becomes like a street party? Um,
Mhm.
and listening to you talk about joining communities that are already existing around the subject matter that you're talking about, you're walking into a full room and you're going, oh, I also like this stuff. Have you heard? What's your opinion? And you're able to then maybe, build a relationship with those few people, and they follow you to the next party, and then they follow you to the next party, and you keep picking up
Exactly.
people. Oh, that's so cool. Yeah,
Yeah.
you've given me visuals here. That's rad. Thank you.
Yeah, I like that it's a party visual, you know?
Yeah,
It's a
yeah. Well, on that note, we're hosting a party, and I'm very excited that
Yes.
Riverside will be there with us in spirit and online and in so many things. We'll obviously be releasing details as we build up to the event in November, but I'm very excited to have Riverside on board, and I'm very keen to see what this means for podcasting in South Africa and specifically in Cape Town, where we're based, and how we can work together to utilize Riverside to its fullest extent, because the capabilities still blow my mind.
Yes. And also, I think what's really cool about it is that it's also open up to people that are even considering podcasting. And I think that that's such a fun energy to be able to take people that are podcasters that are using Riverside, that are even considering podcasting and saying, hey, come join this space. Because I have to be honest, like this community is really, like the podcasting community in general has really blown my mind in the way that
Mm,
as coming from somebody that's a journalist where you have your sources, you have your methods, and you want to keep them close. I was really blown away by just how giving and sharing everybody is in this podcasting community. So I think that that's also a really cool element of it is that instead of just saying, like I want like less podcasts mean more people might listen to me, that kind of thing, that instead it's like no, we want to welcome you into this community. We want to teach you how to do it the best way that you possibly can. And I think that's something that's really unique to
mm.
this community and to the people within it.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
wholeheartedly agree. Also, coming from a media background, it felt very much us versus them. You've got your
Mhm.
various media pillars or your people doing various shows. And although you get on and you share a love for the industry, it does feel like you're constantly competing against one another as opposed to building one another up. And I found exactly the
Exactly.
same thing that you mentioned now with podcasting. It's far more collaborative. People are willing to share their ideas, their equipment, their knowledge, and
Everything.
it's a really great space to be in. And that's, I think, why I'm so excited about this Spark the Creator event, to be able to do exactly that, to spark that creative thing that's sitting inside you. Maybe you haven't ventured into podcasting yet. Maybe you have, but you've hit a bit of a doldrum or a slow, or you're looking for more inspiration to elevate your show. it caters right across the board. And yeah, looking forward to having Riverside there with us on the night.
Yeah, I mean, even like I went to the podcast show in London and I remember leaving just even feeling so inspired. And I've wanted to start a podcast. That's a whole other story. I can't think of my niche. We're still thinking. But
Okay.
like the idea of like I left it feeling like I felt like I was like vibrating, like I was just
Uh,
buzzing with like ideas, inspiration, excitement, and kind of just yeah, it was like these events really just bring something out in you.
Yeah, yeah, fantastic. Well, that is one of the events that I would love to get to. Maybe 2024, the pound gods will favor me, and I'll be able to afford getting over there. Kendall, thank you so very much for your time. I have learned a lot, and especially this analogy of taking a house party and building on it, and yeah, I really like that. And yes, tapping into niches and existing communities and building from there, as opposed to maybe starting a lone little hut and expecting it to develop into a mansion. This house
Exactly.
analogy, we can build on it. It's going places. So
Yeah,
thank you
it's
very
going
much.
there.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for having me. I've really enjoyed our conversation and I really can't wait for the event.
Yeah, me too. Of course, you can check out all of the details for Riverside, and I can't speak highly enough about it. There are so many little facets to the platform, and I look forward to sharing more of those in upcoming episodes and in upcoming newsletters as well. So, the podcast catalyst, Kendall Breitman, thank you so much.
Thank you.